What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical average American here today to react and continue learning about what it's like living in Canada, part two. If you haven't seen part one, we're watching this video of three Americans here giving their stories about what it was like for them living in Canada. And it's very cool because there's actually some stories about them living in Montreal, Vancouver, and we're going to get to Toronto as well. So, some different areas of Canada. And for the most part, not too surprisingly, it's been very positive, very, very complimentary. They've been talking about how beautiful the buildings are, the architecture. It's different than in America. You get some older, more historical architecture going. The low crime in Canada, in particular the cities, lower crime than the American cities. Public transportation is actually usable and good, apparently, in Canada. And people are nice. What more do you want? I mean, I love it here in America. It's kind of beautiful. Crime, is a thing. Public transport is okay, and people are kind of nice. I'm not jealous at all. I'm not jealous of Canada at all. That's not what this video's doing to me. Anyway, sarcasm aside, I've very much been enjoying their stories about what it's been like for them living in Canada. So I'm excited today to pick this up. He has been talking about Vancouver, and I believe the third man who's going to be interviewed is going to talk about his time living in Toronto, which should be very interesting. So let's take a look.
Food is delicious. I loved eating.
Say no more. Let's end the video. I'm sold. Done, done. Food is delicious. We can end it. Okay, let us continue. Of course, that's the first thing he says.
One of my favorite foods is sushi. So anyone who loves sushi here in the
Oh,
States doesn't even know what real or good sushi tastes like until they go to
oh,
Vancouver, because
oh,
it's unreal how delicious it is.
oh.
I
Talk about a random fact. Sushi is great in Vancouver, especially compared to us Americans who have apparently never tasted high quality sushi. That's kind of random. I ain't complaining though.
I'll have to admit, I spent a lot of money eating sushi. If I ever needed, if we ever ate out, I mean, I could get like 3 rolls of sushi for $8. And if I went
Wow.
to go to a fast food and get a burger combo, it would cost the same thing.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I would just rationalize that, of course I'm going to go eat sushi instead of eat out at McDonald's. So I
Okay.
really enjoyed that. I just spoke to some people that are from my mission. We talked for a while 2 weeks ago, and she actually mentioned to me that the Canadian dollar and the US dollar right now are pretty much the same. So I don't think there's a very big difference. At living though,
I don't think that's true at the moment. I feel like I just looked this up actually. US dollar, Canadian dollar. Like right now, one US dollar is $1.34 Canadian. This was made 6 years ago. This video is 6 years old, so that explains it.
living expenses are way higher in Vancouver. Their minimum wage, mind you, is also significantly higher. I think it's like 11 or $12,
Ah.
compared to here, which is like 7.50. So there's a difference there.
Yeah, oh my gosh, don't even get me started with minimum wage in America. Of course it's of course that's yet another thing that it's better in Canada, at least in Vancouver as he's saying, and I imagine in Canada it's tough to do minimum wage worse than America does it. So no big shock there. You can't even survive on minimum wage right now in America. If you're earning minimum wage, you literally can't afford to live anywhere. You'd have to split the rent or something to make ends meet, which is definitely the reality for many Americans living paycheck to paycheck. But I digress. Um, this I have heard since he mentions it that the cost of living can be higher. Like things can be more expensive in Canada if they're being exported from other parts of the world or from America to Canada. Things can get be higher priced certain things. So I've heard of that, but if he's talking about the city, it's kind of expected that in any major city, stuff is going to be very expensive, especially like a huge, well-known city like Vancouver. So that doesn't shock me too much.
there. Um, I think everything cost of living is fairly expensive. Some of the
Mm,
apartments that we lived in weren't very nice, but they were still close to like $1,000 a month.
yeah.
So that is
Huh. That's probably sounds cheap compared to like now.
one thing to know. Everything is more expensive. Even like milk is something that I gave up on my mission because it was just too expensive and I didn't want to buy it every week.
Milk. The milk is expensive. The bagged milk. Is it those bags? Are the bags expensive? You'd think they'd be cheaper. Come on, can't we get milk prices down? Oh, that's kind of funny. Well, it's a trade-off. You're trading more sushi at a lower price for more expensive milk. Who would have thought?
Um, Flip that fish though, like if I wanted to get like a fillet of salmon, like a nice big one, I could get two for $7. So
Wow.
I learned how to eat fish on my mission, and I know how to cook salmon, I think, fairly well.
Is that a Vancouver thing or is that a Canada thing? Fish is ridiculously expensive in America, especially any fish that's any good at all, any kind of quality. It's ridiculously expensive. So most people just don't eat it. Fish can be quite healthy, right? I don't know. I'm not a fish eater because I'm American. But that's interesting if fish is overall more accessible for some reason in Canada, lower price. That's pretty cool.
But other things that I was used to growing up with, I didn't eat as much of, or I didn't buy as much because it was more expensive. Ooh, crime and safety,
Ah.
that's a funny one. That's a funny one. There's like,
Huh.
don't get me wrong. So, I mean, you're going to find crime anywhere you go.
Right.
So, I could specifically think of one city, and all my mission companions and anyone watching this that served in my mission will know exactly what city I'm talking about. That was pretty sketchy. But other
What? Oh my, you're not gonna say, come on, this is no time to be politically correct. This is for entertainment. Wow, one city in particular in Canada that they visited was sketchy. So, I mean, that's like every American city. So, like, man, I wish I knew what he was talking about. Do any Canadians out there know what he's referring to here? Is this like an inside joke?
served in my mission will know exactly what city I'm talking about. That was pretty sketchy. But other than that, honestly, like, I don't remember hearing a lot of crime things about my mission. A funny note, I remember serving in Victoria the 5 months I was there. Obviously, we're not watching CNN or the news or anything like that. I mean, any news we would hear would just be from members or like the front page of the paper sitting on someone's doorstep. And I think the most like preposterous or outrageous news story I heard the whole time I was in Victoria was like a city council debate on whether or not a certain road in Victoria should have a sidewalk or
Okay. I thought that's the most controversial topic coming up in the news is where Canadians are going to build a sidewalk. Well, that's fantastic. I'm laughing, but I'm laughing at the absurdity of how contrasting that is to life in America. Like I don't live in a big city. I don't live in a big town. There's still like gun violence and crime all the time. Like it's wild. Particularly in large American cities for sure. Certain cities, like, I think, let's just keep it general. Let's say overall, without a doubt, the crime in Canada is much lower than America. I'd be willing to look up statistics on that, I'm so sure.
not. So that's kind of a stark contrast between where I'm from and where I grew up.
Mm,
There is a lot of crime where I'm from in California
yeah.
and a lot of like murders and things like that. So typically when you watch the news, you hear at least like one or two things about that. But up there, again, I never watched the news, but if this front page paper that was everywhere for a few months is any indicator, then I think Vancouver is a fairly safe place. And
That's awesome, of course, especially for such a big, well-known city. But like he said, anywhere in the world, like there's gonna be crime. So I don't expect there to be zero crime in Canada. That's just silly. But a lot less.
Missionaries going there probably don't need to worry very much about their physical safety. Um, and I think that's a blessing. I think mothers would appreciate that a lot. I know my mom did, so that was a good thing for her.
Yeah.
Businesses and stuff. Um, I don't know a whole lot. I know there are a lot of members there who were like retired CEOs of companies or running their own like businesses of different sorts. I noticed one thing is
Hmm.
that as
I don't know how big the whole entrepreneur small business thing is in Canada. That'd be interesting to learn more about. He's just glossing over it. But in America, having a small business or starting a business or being an entrepreneur, a CEO, is like there's such a culture around that in America. It's like the one of the most biggest best things you could do. All your friends will be like, "That is so amazing." It's definitely, I don't want to say a fad, but it's definitely like gotten more and more popular, like having a hustle, a side hustle, or a business, or being self-employed, which obviously I think is respectful and cool. Just then you tend to get a lot of people that are kind of putting on a bit of a face, a bit of a show, a bit of a front, trying to just look like they're wealthy or have some huge thing going on, and it kind of takes away from the people who are just genuinely doing it. I don't know. That seems like a really American thing, basically.
like media arts was really popular in Vancouver. A lot of businesses would help other companies create like advertisements or web
Ah,
design or things like that. A lot of people get into that. I think that's offered at some of the schools in British Columbia. So fairly easy for people to
cool.
get into that and then make a living off of it. So I saw
Cool.
that a lot. As far as everything else, I think is pretty much the same as what we experience here.
Yeah, media arts. That's good. Because in America, it's definitely trending towards like, first of all, people are not saying that college is worth it. Don't go to university. Don't go to college. It's not worth it anymore. In America, that's a much bigger debate, I think, because the price of university is substantial. You're taking a risk at this point. You're taking out a lot of loans and you're going to have to pay back a lot of money. Whereas in other parts of the world, such as Canada, there's not so much of a risk involved in just getting an education, which is how it should be, right? So that's kind of sad. Anyway, when people do go to university and college now, a lot of people are just like, oh, go into the sciences, be an engineer, be a doctor, biologist, computer science, and the art media stuff is probably on the decline. So it's honestly nice to hear that actually. Since he mentioned it. Okay, this is the final interview with talking about Toronto. Okay.
Well, when I first received my mission call to Canada, the first thing that I thought of in my mind was igloos and dog sleds and things like that. And
I'm glad that they kept that in the interview. That is, it's so funny to hear that. Like time and I say that a lot. I feel like, oh, Americans feel like Canada is just igloos and cold and maple syrup, and then I feel like, oh, I need someone to back me up here on this, and then there you go, first thing out of his mouth.
was igloos and dog sleds and things like that. And although it is very cold sometimes, I didn't see any igloos and I didn't see any dog sleds.
Right,
If you were to see the city from an airplane or even walking through certain parts of the city, it would look similar to New York or Chicago
right,
or Philadelphia, just a big city
right,
in a Western
right.
culture similar to ours.
Yeah.
When you start to talk to the people and see the diversity there, things change pretty quickly. But it looks like a city just like ours.
Okay.
There were times when I was in downtown when I would ride the subway to church every week. We would get metro passes that would allow us on the buses and on the metros, and we would contact and find and teach lessons and even pray with people in those locations sometimes, which made for some pretty interesting stories, meeting some great people. Um,
Yeah, I know they were there. These three interviewees in particular were in Canada on some kind of religious mission trip, which is interesting because they do mention having to interact with strangers in Canada, which I think would honestly, for their purposes, probably go a lot better than in America. I don't know. But then one of them was saying they were having more success talking to Americans about this kind of thing, trying to spread their religion or talk about it at least, because maybe you're more likely to run into someone in America that's interested in that religious component, or I forget if that's exactly what they said. I think it was. But I was thinking in Canada, you're much more likely to run into someone very polite who's willing to at least talk to you. Whereas in America, there's so often people walk up to you asking for random stuff or trying to sell you something, especially in cities, that Americans get very standoffish and quite blunt at times with just telling people to go away. I don't want to talk to you. No sorry, no cordialness. So that's interesting. I wonder, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle there between Canada and America.
The housing is different depending on what part of the province you're in. If you're in Toronto, you'll typically live in a high-rise building in an apartment. Some of them are old, and some of them are newer and a little bit nicer. If you're outside of the city, you'll typically live in a basement apartment or maybe a shorter, smaller apartment building like I typically.
Oh man, he's not even mentioning the idea of living in a home. I mean, it's probably like trying to buy a home in New York City or something, right? It's not going to happen unless you have like an extra million or two laying around, huh?
Typically did through my mission. Despite Toronto being so big, it's actually a pretty safe city. It's, if I understand correctly, it's the second safest city in Canada behind Vancouver of the big cities. And Canada's crime rate is far, far below any city in the United States.
Okay, I'm glad he mentioned that. I just wanted to hear someone be like, talk about maybe a stat or two, and this makes me feel very confident that the crime in Canada is a lot less than in America.
It's a real safe place. Many missionaries will go through their entire mission without feeling in danger or threatened even once. So that's a nice snippet for all those moms out there to know that their missionaries are typically going to be pretty safe while they're there. Toronto's a pretty liberal place. Lots of people that have different views on same-sex marriage, and even the way that they think about politics being liberal affects their attitude towards certain things, even in the gospel.
Yeah, I think that's very true for most American cities. I think tend to be very liberal, very much more diverse, kind of open-minded school of thought. People like that tend to trend towards living in big cities in America as well. So that's interesting that it seems to be exactly the same as in Canada.
It's a very artsy place. I wasn't into this while I was there, but there's lots of small museums for history or for art, or I've heard the music scene is really good there, things like that.
Cool. Okay, that's it. That's the end. This video here is by Lifey, and I liked it. I gotta give it a like. I really enjoyed the aspect that they talked about 3 different cities, and they interviewed 3 different Americans who visited. Although they were kind of looking at it through the lens of their religious mission towards Canada, which honestly was kind of interesting to me. Because, I think it was good because it just made them have to interact with people more. I would have liked to hear more about that, actually. But based on what they're saying, Canada sounds awesome and, frankly, a lot more pleasant in many different ways than America, particularly American cities. They visited some cities, so I'm trying to compare it to American cities, and it just sounded better, more pleasant, and in many ways very similar, too. So very similar, if not a bit better. So, that's... I'm stuck in America. So I appreciate it for what it is, but I also appreciate learning about what it's like living in Canada, in these Canadian cities. I think it's quite fascinating, quite interesting, and very good. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada, Canadian culture, things in Canada I've never seen before, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.